Just to introduce myself to those of you who don't know me, my name is Agnes, obviously. You can see it on my screen. Um, um, I'm a fighter, which shouldn't come as a surprise considering the topic. I have been playing pretty exactly for 8 years at this stage. Out of that, I've been fighting steadily pretty much exactly 6 years. Although I did manage to get my authorization before that, but then I proceeded to immediately injure myself. So please don't do that. It's inconvenient. I have been, during my fighting career, I have been the King's Champion, I've been the Queen's Champion, I have been the champion to their Highnesses Insula Draconis. I've been champion of Loch here in Ireland twice. I run a weekly practice in the Shire of Dunamara, and we kept that going even during these times online. And I am one of the founders of the Dawn Company, which is a fighters guild here in Insula Draconis. I used to be squire to Duke Vitus here in Drachenwald, and I am now squire to Duke Sean Paragon of Artemisia. Obviously, a disclaimer here, I am not a knight, I am not a peer of any sort, and I don't mean with this presentation to be presumptuous in the sense that I would know things that the peers of the realm would not. I do listen. I listen to my sister fighters. I listen to my brother fighters. I listen to non-fighters who have opinions on the subject. I observe, I talk to people, and specifically feminism and client-centered approach in fitness and sport is a particular interest of mine. Because I'm an armored fighter, this class is written from that perspective. And although many things in this class will probably apply to martial pursuits across the board. Obviously, I cannot remove, the perspective from what I am and what I know. Another bit of a disclaimer. A lot of what I'm saying today will obviously not just apply to women. A lot of it will apply to men too. A lot of it will apply to other gender minorities, if you like, or any minorities at all. But the difference with this is that women and or minorities suffer from the challenges that I'm going to be talking about more and more of them at the same time than most other people. I also want to note that there's a very strong part of me that does not want to give this class. It's not because I don't think that it is important. I do think that it's important. I wouldn't be talking about it otherwise. But I hate it that it is still necessary to be talking about these things in the year 2020. And I hate it that for me, as a fighter, and for my sister fighters, these are things that occupy our brain space so very strongly throughout our fighting careers. And that means that there is less left of our brain capacity to actually focus on our own training. But all these things out of the way, let's get going properly. Does this seem familiar? This is a quote that I have taken from a journal, Harvard Business Review, from an article that I'm quoting quite a lot during this presentation. There's the URL there. The fuller reference is further down. And the speaker is saying that their company has the best intentions when it comes to women, but for some reason, when a leadership role opens up, women are not considered. And what they're saying is that they just can't find women with the right skill set and experience. The genesis of this talk occurred when some time ago there was a discussion on Facebook, of course it was, everything happens on Facebook, and if it was at least somewhat controversial, of course it took place in Facebook. And it...
Why?
Can we please mute the extra person? Thank you. And it came up into the discussion, and that the Order of Chivalry in Drachenwald has a sister, has a female knight. And this was seen as a universally happy thing, but there were people who asked quite reasonably, why aren't there not more? And the standard answer to this is, and I admit that to some extent I'm putting some words here in the mouth of the Order of Chivalry, which perhaps I should be doing. I'm going to do it anyway, because I have heard this from them, that the order judges all candidates on the same merits, and that gender doesn't have anything to do with it. And the meaning here is that no other woman in Drachenwald has reached the standard necessarily to be knighted. This is fair enough. I believe them. This is really, trust me, this is true. Over in fencing, we have, if I'm not mistaken, 3 female masters of defense. So the situation is a little bit better there, but I do know that at least one previous crown put specific effort into the visibility and promotion of senior fencing women. So in my mind, the question, why aren't there more top-level female fighters, is in fact more accurately asked, why is it that not more women progress to the top level? This is the question that we should be asking. What happens? Because we these days have quite a large number of women starting SCA martial arts, including heavy fighting. And there are several who participate in major tournaments as well. There's a lot of women fighters who have red belts. So what happens? Why is it that they don't make it to the top? Now, this is not, of course, a thing peculiar to the SCA. This is something that is just another manifestation of the very well documented phenomenon that we see everywhere in the mundane society, from academia to athletics and business. Something, a thing, has a plenty of female interest at the beginner level and even extending to the intermediate levels. But the number of women drops dramatically at leadership and senior leadership levels. So I have linked a couple of articles just to give you an idea of what is being published out there. These articles were the result of a very quick Google search. They were probably among the first 5 results, so it should not be difficult to find more material about this. Obviously, this is a sort of a closer look into the mundane world. Is somewhat outside the area of the current talk. What is being cited here in this study about women leading the science workforce is that they're talking about lack of recognition, opportunities, career advancements. They don't have anywhere to go, and then the competing demands of parenthood. And again, this is from a journal of leadership education. This is talking about women in the United States workforce and top manager positions therein. These stats are from 15 years ago already. Again, I only did a quick Google. I didn't do any kind of a deep dive into this. This is just to give an example of what's happening in the mundane world. And what is mentioned here, we have discrimination, family life demands, prejudice and stereotyping. And there we're talking about mentorship. Women say that they need different kind of mentorship, more encouragement, an example to follow, and just simply more tasks. And the next bit is interesting. They're saying that male mentors can be resistant to mentor women because they perceive women as more emotional, not as skilled as problem solving, and because of the risk of sexual harassment issues. All right, moving on. And here we come back into the Harvard Business Review commentary. If you read one article of the ones that I have linked in this talk, read this one. It is quite useful, and it has a very constructive tone, and it provides food for thought for everybody. Look at the first paragraph here. They're talking about what it means to become a leader. They say that it involves a fundamental identity shift. And this is something that I am going to be carrying throughout the entire talk. In order to get to the level where you are in a mental place and to fight the fight and to get to the senior leadership levels, to the top level of whatever it is that you're doing, you need to allow it for yourself to get there. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Other paragraphs here important as well. Obviously, the context must support a woman's motivation to lead and also increase the likelihood that others will recognize and encourage her efforts, even when she doesn't look or behave like the current generation of senior executives. So there's a lot of themes already in these 3 slides and that are cropping up and are repeating themselves. So keep those in mind. Now, that Harvard Business Review article brings up a really interesting concept, which is called second generation bias. And this is something that has moved on from the sort of traditional sexism and misogynism, if you like. There is no more an intent to exclude. There is no harm intended. Stop clicking the screen. There's no exclusion intended. There's no harm intended. People have moved on. This is what happens when companies and groups say, we don't want to exclude anybody. Everybody has the same opportunities. We are not looking at gender. We are only looking at skill. But what second generation bias is, it creates a context in which women still fail to thrive or reach their full potential. These are all kinds of subtle and invisible barriers that arise from cultural assumptions and organizational structures, practices, and patterns of interactions that inadvertently benefit men while putting women at a disadvantage. Examples of this that are given in that article include lack of role models for women. Well, you know, if you are of the opinion that women can only have women as role models, then yeah, okay. And then it mentions gendered career paths and gendered work. The concept of trailing spouse is from the world of diplomacy, where you have usually the male diplomat and then the wife who is prepared to move anytime the diplomat gets a new post and works at home and does all the usual kind of networking, you know, this kind of stuff, supporting role. Lack of access to networks and sponsors. The idea here is that men choose to train junior men whom they think that, not because they are necessarily consciously choosing to do this, because they would probably completely deny that there's any kind of gender factor involved. And they would say that they choose people who have the most potential to get into the higher levels. Now, what is not necessarily being noticed here is that the people who have the most potential to get there is men. And it is considered that women don't have the same kind of potential. Double binds, what is meant here is that they are qualities across genders that are nominally the same ones, but are viewed differently. So, everybody knows this, when you are assertive, you're a man, when you are bitchy, you're a woman, all these kind of stuff. For instance, if somebody is forthright, outspoken, even a bit of a blunt, it is more acceptable in a man, and a woman might be called abrasive. An interesting example of this in the SCA is when I have seen two people do more or less the same thing. The man was called very chivalrous, and the woman was called, isn't she nice? Is it an expectation that a woman cannot be chivalrous and that they need to, be nice to begin with? They're completely different expectations and starting basis for each. I want to talk next about what, in my mind, is required to progress and to higher levels. When I say higher levels, I don't necessarily talk about knighthood. I talk about just getting into a higher standard and to be considered, to acquire the level of skills and personal qualities that you are seen and acknowledged as one of the top fighters. And I have broken these things in 3 different categories: prowess, PLQs, peer-like qualities, and what I, for want of a better term, am calling here camaraderie. It goes much further than that. It's more to do with interpersonal relationships of all sorts. I'll explain that very shortly. Within each category, there are element blocks that contribute to that particular category. It's probably not exhaustive. I didn't spend that long at this, but it is just one way of looking at it for the purposes of this conversation. So for prowess, what do you need to develop prowess? You need time. You need time to practice, to develop your fitness. You need time to take care of armor because it's going to break. It's going to mold if you leave it, in the rain. Ask me how I know. You need time to watch videos. You need time to travel because, if you are intent on becoming better, if you are intent on becoming the best you can be, you have to travel. That's the same as in any sport. You have to seek out the people who are better than you and to learn from them and acquire greater skill by fighting them. You also need practical tools. This means things like well-fitting armor, any other relevant gear, training equipment, books. You need a place to practice in, and you need the means to travel with. That may be monetary resources, or may mean a vehicle, or all of the above. You need mental tools. This means enough self-belief and self-esteem to strive, a healthy amount of ambition, taking ownership of your own training, and a conviction that you deserve to take your own time and to do a competitive sport. You need resilience and growth mindset, which is not easy to get if you don't start out with it, and few people do. You need experience. XP, you need to be making the most of the available time to gain this experience. You need to learn what you need to learn. You need to be exposed to different fighting styles, different levels of opponents, but also getting to fight the best people that you can find. And you need support. You need support to acquire all of the above. Your family needs to grant you enough space and to get the necessary time and to spend the necessary money. Your community needs to support you with practical and mental tools, as well as giving you the experience. And the big benefit of having a personal coach, whatever form that'll take, is that if they do their job really well, they can support and advise you with all of these things. If we look at PLQs, then, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are many PLQs, and this is really not meant to be exhaustive list in any sort. I think that these are the most relevant qualities here. You need to show leadership. So you're providing an example to other people, you're stepping up when you're needed, and you drive things forward. And next is a difficult one, confidence. And because the way I'm looking at confidence here is that it makes you realistic about your, where you are and where you need to go. If you have healthy confidence, it means that you're not putting yourself down, but you're not putting yourself on a pedestal either. You know yourself, know thyself. This is the whole maxim right there. Self-awareness. Now, this is the ownership again. You take responsibility for your successes and your mistakes, and you acknowledge that neither of these things means that you have to stop and can't go any further. Just because you're successful doesn't mean that you can stop doing things. Just because you make mistakes, just because you fail, that doesn't mean that you have to stop and can't go any further. That's not how it works. But at the same time, you do recognize your limits and you work with them rather than against them. And supporting others, which includes teaching. And the way I'm describing it in all of the whole support notion here is that you smooth things out for other people. Now, for the camaraderie bit, which is more properly into personal stuff. So what I have here is renown, respect, and reputation. So renown means that you are known probably across most of the wider fighter community. At least they know your name. You need to be respected. This is your reputation stat. Although of course I'm talking about reputation separately. So it's made up by your respect is made up by your prowess, but also by the PLQ. So in a way, it kind of encompasses the other two. So it's how you conduct yourself, and the fact that you're being known to be a fair and a sound person. Now, what's important is that this is not the same as being universally liked. People can respect you without liking you. And think about reputation separately. You need to be a reasonable person who is known to do stuff, to be proactive and get involved in things, and someone who people can work with. So obviously these things with the other two, and all of these connects to each other, and that they are all interlinked for the current purposes. What I want to do next is to take each of these categories and consider what challenges we have here, particularly with women in mind. And as I said, of course, this is not necessarily limited to women, and not, of course, every woman will encounter all of these things. We are generalizing to an extent, which I don't like. but sometimes we have to. Um, and again, women are more likely to encounter more of these challenges at the same time and more often. So what obstacles are there in the way of developing your prowess? Practice time, chores, and family. It tends to be still that a lot of women feel that they are responsible for the majority of the housework, or actually are. I would like to give a shout out to my husband, Ed, at this point, who takes on stuff, who cooks, cleans up when I make him do so, and does all sorts of other stuff so that I have the time to practice. It wouldn't be possible without that. Many of you who are male fighters probably rely on your ladies a lot with this, and you may or may not be aware of how precious they are in this regard. But not everybody has that option, and chances are that if you are a wife and a mother, there are expectations placed on you by yourself or by other people that would not necessarily be the case otherwise. That becomes a problem, of course, when it is combined with work challenges. I mean, obviously men have work challenges as well, but they don't necessarily have the whole family sphere to look after as well when they come home. Thinking about practical tools next, I had zero armoring knowledge when I started. Some of you know my whole, I don't know what the rivet is thing, from years ago when I was too embarrassed to say even that. I still hate armoring because I don't know how to do it. That's why I pay a lot of money for other people, to make mistakes. But chances are that a lot of men come to this with more sort of base knowledge, possibly derived from other stuff, from other pursuits, than statistically a lot of women do. Obviously, because of the female shape, it is more difficult to find well-fitting armor unless you actually have somebody to custom make it for you. One of the interesting things about this is that the female waist is higher up than the male waist. So even if loner gear would otherwise fit, things like bending at the waist may be more difficult for women because they are restricted by the fact that the loner gear just doesn't allow them to do that. And what I realized actually quite recently as well, that there's a very strong argument that something like a seat belt for women should sit much higher up than it does for men. Now, maybe this is common knowledge and I'm just an idiot for not realizing this before. But it's very hard to realize these things when all the examples that you see come from male bodies. Women have, generally speaking, a small grip. Those of you who were around a few years ago when I was still starting out know that I bitched and moaned about the fact that it was absolutely impossible for me to find gauntlets because these things are tiny. And then I went to Australia and paid an awful lot of money for a pair of really nice ones. But it's these kind of things. The fact that we have a smaller grip means that it's more difficult to grasp a sword. Yeah, it's this kind of minor little things that you don't think about, that you wouldn't have had any reason to think about unless you are the person who suffers from this. It's a little bit like being left-handed and trying to use right-handed tools. Moving on to mental tools. This is, probably the biggest hurdle of all of these things. to women, and because of our socialization, the way we are brought up. When I say that, and I want to make this very clear, I am not saying that this is men's fault. I'm not saying that this is necessarily something that men have brought the female socialization about. I'm an equal opportunities accuser here, because, and we can see this across societies, it is in fact women who perpetuate these kind of things. It's women who perpetuate stereotypes. It's women who tell their daughters that picking a sword and running around is not ladylike. I saw this happen with my very eyes at Raglan. And it's women, it's mothers who tell their daughters that they are never good enough, that they need to do this and they need to do that they are too fat, that they are too slim, that they are too loud, that they are too quiet, that they are whoring around, because they have a different boyfriend every week. Anything of this sort, that kind of feedback tends to come from mothers. Now we can argue over the origins of this, at some other point, down with patriarchy and all that kind of stuff. But this is, if you look at any women's magazines, they are mostly written by women for women. And you'd think that they would be supportive and empowering, and telling the sisters, how to get on with life. And all they are is a fucking listing of every single possible mistake and error and fault and flaw that the readers might have. My hairdresser gets me. This is not as much of a non sequitur as you might think. And I remember, one of the first times I went there, and he sort of looked at me and went, so would you like to have GQ, that's Gentleman's Quarterly, or Esquire? I went, let's try GQ, please. It's a men's magazine. It's not a porn mag. It's for those of you who don't know, it's sort of a glossy magazine for men. And when I started reading it, I was stunned, because it wasn't talking about the flaws of the reader. It wasn't assuming that there were things in the reader that necessarily needed to be fixed. The attitude there was, you are awesome, and these are the ways in which we can make you more awesome. Whereas the attitude of women's magazines is, you're shit, and if you follow these things, you might possibly be a little bit better, but you're still shit. So let's think about mental tools. So self-image. What is it? What is your self-identity? You probably don't start out as a leader. Chances are, if you do, fair play. You probably don't need to be here attending this talk. But women carry these demons with them. The demons of the feeling that you don't belong, and that you are having to try very hard and prove yourself so that you can get to play with the boys. That you, no matter what you do, you're good. You're never going to be good enough. That is a sort of consistent track of the female mind. And it's the female perfectionism that gets me most of all. That really hampers things. It's this thing that if something goes slightly wrong, or if something doesn't work out, if you fall off your training wagon or something, then you're a failure. There's no point in continuing because you're a failure. It means that dealing with feedback is difficult, because if your coach or your trainer tells you that something wasn't as effective as it could have been, and that there are things that you could have done better. What the woman will hear is that you did a wrong thing, you are a bad person. That's a bitch to get around, and to work your way toward around. Similarly, asking what you need. You know, in this sport of ours, you need to get yourself out there. You need to talk. You need to say, "Hey, I want you to train me. Hey, can you tell me how you did that? Can we talk about armoring? Where did you get that stuff?" You need to be able to do that, and that can be hard because you're brought up to expect that that you shouldn't ask, that it's rude, that you shouldn't expect anything for yourself. Moving on to experience, women may be expecting different teaching methods depending on what they're used to. Different tourney types can cause issues. Some women that I have talked to have mentioned the issue of competition. They don't see themselves as competitive. And I think that it comes, and before I go on further with that, there's a large number of female fighters whom, if you ask why they're doing it, what they want to achieve, they're just like, oh, I'm just having a little bit of fun. I don't really expect to get anywhere much, which is fair enough. If that's what's really the case, then no problem. But I think that some of the issues with competitiveness and striding is rooted in this whole issue of imperfection being a failure. So if you lose a fight and if you lose a tourney, that means that you are automatically a bad person. A woman probably, woman fighter probably wouldn't necessarily even, verbalize it like that. It's probably not even something that they would necessarily, point out. But I suspect that's what's there. That's what makes competition bad and undesirable. It's that feeling of worthlessness if it doesn't work out. Different calibration and shifting goalposts. This is this whole thing that if you are a woman fighter, you will need to hit harder than your male fighter fellows in order to be, in order to have your shot taken. This is, obviously, this is not the case for everybody again, but this is something that does present itself. Cute until threat. This refers to the fact that there are a lot of men out there who are very happy to help women fighters get on and move forward until the woman starts beating them. When that woman becomes a threat, that is no longer desirable, and then when troubles can start. Pressure of expectations comes from all sorts of different angles. It may come from the women themselves. It may come from the fighting community, and it may come from the non-fighting community as well. This is the bit where, because you are, even if you just want to be a fighter, if you are a minority fighter, you are seen as the ambassador of that community. And and when you go to the field, you are carrying the weight of the expectations of that community with you. So you're going to be the heroine or the villain, regardless of what happens. And then you start feeling that if you don't do as well as they would like you to do, then you're letting them down. And that's a hard one. Support. I mentioned that your family needs to support you. If your family are not supporting you, if they don't like you, if your husband doesn't like you fighting for whatever reason, it's going to be a really difficult thing to get around. Other women, that's such a difficult thing. Women are not brought up to support each other. Women are brought up to compete with each other, to have this kind of a rivalry going on. And when you are a woman, and lots of your friends are men, then misunderstandings may arise among the women who are not part of that community. There's going to be gossip, and either you just shut up and put up with that, and if you can't take it, you leave because you don't want to deal with that. And the rest of your fighting community needs to support you as well. This is generally not a problem in Drachenwald. What I feel I need to make the point, and that I think that as kingdoms go, I think Drachenwald is very good, or at least these days, about female fighters. Now, this is through my own personal lens and my own personal experiences, which also involves some bad stuff. And I realize that not everybody here necessarily has the same good experiences. We have a little bit of extra noise as well. Can we turn that off? Thank you. We've kind of talked about most of these already, because these come down to the mental tools, which are the most difficult ones for women. But the challenges for leadership is that you really need to have the confidence to teach, or to pretend that you have a confidence to teach. That's what I usually go with. You fake it till you make it. You need to believe that you have something to share. Your teaching needs to be received well. Being typecast as gender expert. This means that if you are a female senior fighter, or if you are a female coach, people may assume that the only thing that you ever want to talk about is gender. This is why I don't want to be giving this talk. I would much rather talk about, how to use your core, a particular training exercises that I have invented, particular drills that I have done, how to involve your entire body, many other things. And here I am talking about gender. And the differing expectations of the chivalric virtues. I mentioned the example of being chivalrous versus being nice already. So, just as a sort of an exercise, have a look at people that you think are particularly well blessed with chivalric virtues, and see, can you apply those same things to people of different gender? Confidence here again, I already talked about the putting yourself forward. We know that that's more difficult for women across the board. Ambition, it is not as accepted for women to say that they have ambition in something that is seen as a male area than it is for men. A long view, what I mean by that is that you're willing to have the confidence that once you do stuff, once you train and practice for long enough, you will get results. So this is not losing your confidence in the meantime because of that imperfectionism. Indeed, perfectionism, to do with the fact that imperfection is failure. This fallacy that a lot of women have. And then you need to be able to have difficult conversations, possibly such as the one that we're having right now, but also in terms of having difficult conversation with other people. If you're marshalling, you may need to, confront somebody, who is not behaving themselves on the field, and holding your ground. It means that, if you end up in a difficult conversation and somebody's putting pressure on you, you keep doing what's right. You're not stepping away from the conversation just because you want to be meek and compliant. Self-awareness, I mentioned ownership already, and growth mindset. Growth mindset is all about, in the belief of getting better and, being able to get over setbacks. And that in fact setbacks are temporary, and that you can get over them, to get past them, and that things will be better in the future, if you put the work in. Prioritizing, yes, that's how you say it. Prioritizing, difficult. So this means that you are taking the time that you need to develop your prowess, and it may mean, for instance, that you're foregoing those chores. And can you do that? Are there consequences if you do that? Learning to deal with feedback. I already mentioned that. Taking feedback as feedback and not as an indication of your personal value. Recovery time, admitting that you need sometimes time to recover, to take the rest, especially if you've been injured, and that does not mean that you are a failure, because this goes back to the whole necessity to prove yourself. If you're confident that you don't have anything to prove, then you just take the recovery time. You're like, whatever, it'll take the time that it'll take. Recognizing and dealing with problems is a sort of a catch-all for all of those things. Comparing yourself with other people, oh my God, that is so difficult for everybody, not just women, but again, women do it more because of the inter-woman rivalry and the encouragement for this kind of toxic thing that the society inflicts on you. Supporting others. Now, again, this is the whole thing of women teaching women. This can be a good thing. It may mean that the trainer is more attuned to the issue that the trainees face. But again, there is a risk of gender stereotyping there, that because you're a woman, then you only ever end up teaching women. And there are always expectations that it's the women who provide nurturing and service, much more so than the men. And this goes back to the differing expectations of the chivalric virtues again. So again, while this is an important part of supporting other people, is it going to be your entire purpose in life? Because then, and this is something that I've seen in SCA and elsewhere as well, is that you become the person who's supporting the experts. In the conference world, in the academic world, we have the talk of manels, which is, academic panels where you only have male people being the experts. And these are quite frowned upon these days. Sometimes this is mitigated by having a separate chair moderator of the session who's female, and this is a little bit better, but it's not great because it means that the woman is still taking the supporting role in relation to the male experts. And then let's move on to the challenges to do with camaraderie or interpersonal stuff. The quote here is from that Harvard Business Review article again, and it is a woman talking about their workplace, and she says, "It's nothing overt. I just feel less of a connection, either positive or negative, with the guys I work with. So sometimes I seem to have difficulty getting traction for my ideas." This one, again, is really difficult in terms of the second generation bias, because nobody actually wants to, I sincerely believe that the majority of the male fighters, for instance, or the majority fighters, whatever we're calling them, wants to be friends and wants to be in good terms with female fighters. But it runs into an awful lot of small details that, when you put them together, they become a much bigger mountain. There are things, and again, not exhausted, these are just the kind of things that came to my mind straight away. Development work refers to ideas, discussions, referrals. Have you spoken to so and so? Discussions and organizing of events and plotting out strategy, or comparing things in the Marshall's Handbook, something, these kind of things. Changing rooms and armory. Now, one of the most social situations for fighters is when you're getting into or out of armor, especially if it's around a tourney, because there's a little bit of jitters, and most people are at least a little bit nervous or anticipatory. But that's when you get an awful lot of useful information and comparison of things, and it's a good comparison of things, and ideas and advice and these kind of things. Now, if that space where that can happen is not unisex, then that risks women and being shut out of that kind of a social conversation, networking conversation. Now, are the women happy to be changing in the same room as the guys? Are the guys going to be happy that the women are changing there as well? Now, that's an example, of an issue that has several different kind of facets to it. And if you want to keep those changing rooms separate, how can you ensure that kind of a social space is created somewhere else? Or how are you going to allow that opportunity for women? Different kind of social contexts then. Things like sauna, if you're in Drachenwald, okay, so that's an easily understood situation. If there are people here who are not from Drachenwald, in Nordmark and Arnemetsa in particular, it is very common that the fighters have a sauna after fighting. It's the best thing in the world. But particularly in Arnemetsa, it means that everybody's naked inside the sauna. And that depends on where you're coming from. That can be okay, or that can be horrendous. I have sat in a sauna after a Nordic 1000 tourney in Arnemetsa with probably about 12 large, smelly, hairy male fighters from Nordmark and Arnemetsa. And I'm okay with it because I grew up in Finland. It doesn't bother me. But, if you are from some other culture, would you do that? Would you, as a woman, would you go into a sauna and sit naked, with your fighter mates? And, it's there what they're doing, the storytelling and praising each other and networking again and just creating the community. And if you are uncomfortable in that kind of situation, how are you going to gain access to that kind of thing? Sexist and sexualized language. I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer, really. I'm not going to spend a lot of time to talk about that because that's available elsewhere. Don't be an idiot, basically. So the next one is going to be probably the most controversial thing that I'm going to say here tonight, which is the traditional image of the women's role in the SCA. And you can see that even now. So if you think about fighter context, we have the whole stereotype of the male knight and their female inspiration, who stands passively at the side of the list field and is beautiful and quiet and gracious and lovely. Now, of course, they're going to be, completely a powerhouse, when we're talking about training and that kind of stuff, but that's not what we're talking about here. We are talking about the idea of inspiration and that this is the role that women should be doing rather than doing things themselves. There's material there, for a whole different class. So I'm not going to spend time there because we're almost out of time anyway. And I hope that we can steal some time after this for discussion where you can, hunt me away with pitchforks and torches or something like that. But that's something to consider anyway. So for the last two slides, I have gathered a selection of suggestions what you can do either as a woman fighter or a male fighter who wants to help in order to get away from this kind of second generation bias and towards creating a situation where more women or more minorities feel and that they have the environment to progress further in their fighting career. These are anything but exhaustive, because there are probably many other things that you could think of, but these are just suggestions. So practical things: organize practices at different times to allow for home demands. So if a woman fighter is very busy at home for whatever reason, maybe they can't make the weekly practice as often as they would like. But if you take care to organize practices at the weekends or at some other evenings and vary that so that they have the opportunity and to make it at other times as well. Obviously, they, concern seriously believe women. This has been talked about a lot. You should present women as experts and authorities and defer to them where appropriate. Just things like ask Molly, she knows better, or what did Molly say about that? Ask women to teach and accept women's offers to teach on topics that are not related to gender. They may want to talk about gender, great, fantastic, but they may want to talk about other stuff as well. And they may have stuff to contribute to general ideas and theories of fighting that has nothing to do with gender. Offer them genuine compliments, especially when defeated. Allow women the same space to concentrate before tourneys as for male competitors. You don't need to be going up to them and saying, it's going to be great, when you're prince or when you're queen or whatever. No, they just want to focus on the performance the same as the bros. Self-police where necessary. So this is things like saying to somebody who's been an idiot that, what you just said or did was not cool. Or you can say things like, it looked like Molly got a lot of shots through. Can we talk about that? Pay attention to your language. Something that I see happen quite a lot still is on Facebook where there's Ask the Shiv group. A lot of people can start their questions with gentlemen or sirs or my lords. Usually somebody corrects them, but it's just tiring. So, you can say things like my brothers and sisters, or you can, if you're referring to, people around you, equal, whatever, the fighters, or you can say things like my kin, my fighting family, things like this. And the next one is, I think, very important, is that you need to treat consorts with respect, regardless of gender. I've seen instances, and I've heard about instances where male consorts of female fighters are making a joke of it. So they are putting on sort of panto-like plastic artificial extra women, stupid, panto female airs, and that demeans their fighter. That demeans the whole idea of a fighter and a consort entering a list together. and supporting each other and supporting the kingdom or the principality doing so. Again, I'm going to give my husband a shout out, and I'm not just because he's listening a few meters away. Whenever he has been my concert, he has absolutely played it straight. He's my support. He's my rock. He's the one that I go to when shit goes wrong and I need to have a little bit of a cry. But otherwise, he's always there. He's being his male furry self. And yeah, you know what? It's great. It's fantastic. So then I say, be professionally social with your female colleagues. What I mean by that is that, when you're socializing with female fighters, if you're male, drink your beer, whatever, but ask for their opinions on what happened on the field and show interest when they're given. Ask them to analyze what happened and ask them to discuss the fights that you had with them, as you would with your male buddies. And use female fighters as examples of chivalric virtues. Don't just pick the blokes. Show that women can do these things and beat these things as well. This is not, of course, just something that other people need to do, because this is an area where women need to put a lot of work in as well. Because I said earlier on, it's the women who perpetuate the toxic stuff. And what really, again, these are suggestions, not exhaustive, etc., etc. So just some ideas here. Trust other women. Support your sister fighters. Support female fighters. Believe that they are not out there to steal your boyfriends or your girlfriends or whatever. That they are there because they want to learn, because they want to have sincere friends, and because they want to have, yes, certainly important relationships. They want to have, siblings and comrades on the field. And if you're intending to get to the higher levels as a female fighter, you need to be prepared to do a lot of mental work. Because I mentioned that leadership is an identity. And if you're not there, your identity may change during your journey. And that's scary. It's not only difficult, but it is also terrifying, because who you are is going to change. When I say you need to seek out support with strong egos, I don't mean that you need to seek out support with people who think that they are, fantastic and the best things in the universe. But these people need to be confident enough that they are not threatened by seeing an ambitious and prospectively successful woman, especially when they start winning against them. You should consider carefully when you are offered supporting roles as to whether to take them or not, and if you take them, what are you going to do with them? Do not accept that your only role in the fighting community or around it is to provide support and admin and service to other people. If you have difficulty with concepts such as competition or something else, try reframing them in your mind. I'm happy to talk to you about those separately. What helped me a lot was when I understood that everything is practice, that the training never stops, that the practice never stops. And just as we say that I like to, take a little bit of an older sense to the meaning of the word practice. I am practicing my art, if you're just sculpting something. You are also practicing your art when you are training and when you're fighting. And when you think about it in that sense, it doesn't matter when what you win and lose. Of course, we always like to win. I'm not saying that, but losing doesn't suck as much. When you take it, when you take that kind of a attitude towards it. If you can't find role models in real life, seek out them in fiction. Seek them out in history or mythology. There's plenty of them out there. And again, I'm happy to help if you need some ideas. You do need to prioritize, and you need to take the time for yourself. Plan out slots in your diary for training as much as you can, and follow that plan as well. And if you can, then plan all the other stuff around that. And fundamentally, you need to accept that your path is going to be hard, but it is going to be worth it for your growth. Because if you are never going to get, even if you're never going to get the bling of a higher rank, you will have grown, you will have changed, and you will have benefited in a number of different ways that you wouldn't have otherwise done. If you want to talk further, there's my email. It's better to use that if you're not already friends with me on Facebook. I try to keep that curated and restricted these days. I'm always happy to talk about fighting stuff and theory. I will make these slides available. Thank you for your attention, ladies, gentlemen, and other beings, and thank you for your patience.